The night I worked the closing shift at the grocery store was unlike any other. I had been there for a few months, mostly doing evening and night shifts at the store in a small suburban town in Pennsylvania. It was the kind of place where you knew most customers by name, or at least face, and the quiet hum of the refrigerators and fluorescent lights was almost comforting. That night, though, something felt off from the moment I walked in. I clocked in at 8 p.m., as usual, and my coworker Dave was already there, counting down the tills. We exchanged the usual greetings, but I noticed he looked a little pale, a little too serious. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe he was just tired or something was on his mind. The store was quiet for a while, maybe one or two customers drifting in for last-minute snacks or bread. I started my usual routine, restocking the shelves in the snack aisle, tidying up the candy displays, checking dates on dairy products. It was the kind of mindless work that gave me space to think. Around 10 p.m., Dave left for his break, and I was alone on the floor. That's when I first noticed the aisles were unusually dark, or at least felt darker than normal. The overhead fluorescents flickered more than they usually did, casting shadows that seemed to twitch and stretch along the linoleum floor. I told myself it was just the old wiring, nothing more. As I walked down aisle 5, which was mostly canned vegetables and soups, I heard a faint whisper, so faint I thought it might be the sound of the air conditioning. Then I heard it again, clearer. "Help me." My skin prickled, and I stopped in my tracks. I looked around, but the aisle was empty. No customers, no other employees. I tried to shake it off, assuming maybe it was just me, or my mind playing tricks in the quiet. I picked up a can of tomato soup and placed it back on the shelf. As I did, the lights flickered rapidly, and I heard a loud crash behind me. I spun around and saw a metal shelf near the back of the store had toppled over, cans and boxes scattered all over the floor. Strange, because I was sure I had checked that aisle earlier and everything was fine. I walked cautiously over, flashlight app on my phone already out. The scattered cans looked ordinary, nothing unusual. But near the fallen shelf, I spotted a small, crumpled piece of paper. Picking it up, I noticed it had a scribbled note in messy handwriting. "Don't trust the man who watches." I looked around. No one was there. The store was still mostly empty. A cold draft swept down the aisle, making me shiver. I turned to head back to the front, but the lights suddenly went out entirely, plunging the store into darkness. I dropped my phone. It skittered across the floor, its light flashing on and off. The emergency lights kicked on after a moment, but they barely illuminated the space, casting long shadows and making the aisles look like tunnels. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Not mine, not anyone I recognized. I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. The footsteps grew louder, approaching. I turned to see a tall figure standing just beyond the end of aisle 7. Its face was obscured by shadows, but I could feel its eyes on me. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. The figure vanished. I ran to the front of the store and tried to open the main doors, but they wouldn't budge. The automatic locks were engaged, and my calls to the manager went unanswered. I was trapped. Panicking, I grabbed the emergency exit key from behind the register and unlocked the back door. I ran outside into the cold night air, gasping for breath. The next day, I went back with the manager and a couple of employees to inspect the store. They found no explanation for the fallen shelf or the note. Security footage from the night was corrupted in the sections where the lights had gone out. I quit that job the same week. Even now, months later, I can't explain what happened that night. I don't know who or what I saw in those aisles or why I was left that note, but I'll never go back to that store after dark. Story, the end. The thing about working the night shift at a grocery store is that it feels like you're the last line of defense against absolute silence and darkness. I worked at a place called Havens Market, a small-town grocery store in rural Ohio just off the interstate. It was the kind of store that locals depended on, but outsiders would easily miss. A dimly lit building with peeling paint and a faded sign that struggled to stay lit after sundown. I was 25 and needed a steady paycheck after losing my last job, so I took the night stocking position without hesitation. At first, the job was monotonous but manageable. The night shift ran from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., long after the store closed at 10, giving me time to reorganize shelves, stock the cooler, and clean up. There were usually only two of us on the floor, me and an older woman named Sharon who worked checkout during the evenings. The manager, a man named Dan, rarely stayed past closing. On my first week, the oddities began almost immediately. It was an uneventful night. I was stacking canned goods when I heard a faint noise, like footsteps shuffling near the bakery aisle. I turned, but the aisle was empty. I chalked it up to the store's settling or rats. This was a small town, after all. But then came the smell. A faint but unmistakable odor of rot and something metallic, like blood mixed with old sweat. The smell wasn't strong enough to be alarming, but it lingered near the back storage area, the one we called the receiving dock. I asked Sharon if she noticed anything weird. She shrugged and said, "Old buildings have their quirks. Sometimes I hear footsteps when I'm alone, but it's probably just the night playing tricks on us." Her tone was casual, but I caught a flicker of unease in her eyes. A couple of nights later, I was cleaning near the frozen foods section when the lights flickered violently. The store went dark for a second, then the emergency lights kicked on. In the low red glow, I noticed something moving at the edge of my vision, an indistinct figure standing near the meat coolers. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, I decided to check the security cameras. The system was old and glitchy, but I hoped to see something to explain what I'd seen. The monitors showed static, flickering images, and then one camera feed froze on a blurry image of a man standing in a dark hoodie, face obscured. I zoomed in, but the pixels blurred the face entirely. A chill ran down my spine. I told Dan about the flickering lights and strange figure on camera. He laughed it off, saying the store had been there for 50 years, and ghosts weren't new. "Just old memories hanging around," he said, smirking. But his eyes were guarded. One night, while I was alone stocking shelves in aisle 7, I heard the PA system crackle. The voice was garbled but unmistakable. It sounded like a woman whispering my name over and over. "Mike! Mike! Mike!" I froze. The store was supposed to be empty. I sprinted to the front where the phones and registers sat. Sharon wasn't answering her radio. I called out, but there was no reply. The whispering continued, growing louder. I covered my ears and rushed to the emergency exit door. It was locked tight. My heart pounded as the whispering morphed into words. "Leave, leave, leave." I was about to call Dan when the power surged. The lights snapped back on, and the voice cut out. I grabbed my stuff and left immediately, feeling eyes on me the entire way out. Over the following weeks, the incidents grew worse. I'd find products knocked off shelves, but no one was ever around. One night, I heard laughter echoing down the aisles, a high-pitched giggle that didn't belong in a grocery store. Then, something in the walk-in freezer caught my eye. A single bloody handprint smeared on the frost-covered door. I couldn't explain it, and when I showed Dan, he just told me to clean it and forget I saw it. The scariest moment came late one December night. I was finishing my shift, locking up when I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around and saw a woman in an old-fashioned dress standing at the end of aisle 3. Her eyes were dark, empty, and her mouth was frozen in a silent scream. I stumbled back, nearly dropping my keys. She vanished before I could blink. I quit that night. I never returned to Havens Market. But sometimes, when I drive past that place on the way home, I see a shadow in the window, watching. And I still hear the whispering. Story, the end. The grocery store was one of those small-town chains. Nothing fancy, just a practical place where the aisles were always a little too narrow, and the fluorescent lighting hummed relentlessly overhead. I worked there for a few months, mainly night shifts, stocking shelves and keeping an eye on the few customers who wandered in after midnight. The town was sleepy, with a population barely over 20,000, and the store itself sat on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. One night, it was just past 11 p.m. when I arrived. The air was cold and damp from a recent rainstorm, and the parking lot was nearly empty, except for a couple of cars tucked in the far corners. Inside, the usual fluorescent buzz greeted me. The store manager, Lisa, a woman in her mid-40s with a tired smile, waved from the back office. She was closing early due to a staffing shortage, so I'd be covering the closing shift mostly by myself. I clocked in, grabbed a handheld radio from the counter, and started the usual routine, checking aisles, straightening products, wiping down shelves. The store felt calm and empty, the way it did on most weeknights. Occasionally a customer drifted in, usually someone grabbing a late snack or an essential forgotten earlier. About an hour in, I noticed something odd near aisle 8. The shelves there had been restocked an hour ago, but a few cans of soup were knocked askew on the shelf, some even on the floor. I sighed, grabbed the dustpan and broom from the nearby cleaning closet, and started to tidy up. As I bent down, I thought I heard a faint scraping noise, like someone moving a cart slowly across the linoleum. I looked up. No one was there. "Must be my imagination," I muttered and continued cleaning. When I finished, I decided to take a break in the employee lounge, which was just off the back corridor. I sat down, pulled out my phone, and checked the time. It was midnight. Just as I was about to get up, the store's overhead lights flickered. A few seconds later, the power cut out entirely. The store was plunged into near darkness, save for the emergency exit signs glowing a dull red. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed my radio and tried to call the manager's office, but there was no response. Using my phone's flashlight, I carefully made my way to the electrical room to see if I could reset the breaker. The hallway was eerily silent, except for the soft hum of the emergency lights. When I opened the electrical room door, the smell of burnt wiring hit me instantly. Inside, the breaker panel was sparking lightly. I quickly closed the door, pulled on the safety gloves stored nearby, and flipped the main switch. The lights flickered back on, but now there was a strange buzzing coming from the speaker system. Suddenly, the store's PA crackled to life. A voice I didn't recognize spoke through the speakers in a distorted, warped tone. "Help me. Help me." I froze, the hairs on my neck standing up. "Who's there?" I shouted. The voice was gone. I ran back to the main floor, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I checked the aisles, but no one was there. The store was still eerily quiet. I called the manager's office again. Heck, no answer. I headed toward the front entrance to check the doors. They were locked. I could hear the faint sound of footsteps in the parking lot. I looked through the glass, but saw no one. Suddenly, the automatic doors slid open. A man stepped inside, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring. I swallowed hard. "Can I help you?" I asked cautiously. He didn't move. "Sir? You need to leave. The store's closing." He took a slow step forward. I reached for my phone to call security, but the signal was gone. "Please leave," I said, voice trembling. He smiled, or rather the hint of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then he vanished. I blinked. He was gone. My radio crackled again. The voice returned, whispering urgently, "Don't trust him." The store's lights flickered once more and then went out again. I was trapped in the dark with something I didn't understand. The night stretched on, each hour heavier with the weight of the unknown. When dawn finally broke, I found the manager in the parking lot, waiting for me. She looked pale. "We heard nothing on the cameras," she said quietly. "But you heard the voice?" I nodded. She shook her head. "This store has history," she said. "Some say a man disappeared here years ago. No one ever found him." I never returned to that store again. Some nights when I'm alone, I still hear that distorted voice whispering through the static. Story the end. The grocery store was nearly empty when I arrived just after midnight. I worked the overnight shift at the hospital and sometimes stopped by to grab some food on the way home. It was a quiet routine by then. The parking lot mostly deserted, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft whoosh, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I pushed my cart in and scanned the aisles. The store was well stocked. Rows upon rows of canned goods, frozen dinners, fresh produce, and dairy, all neatly arranged. The smell of cleaning supplies lingered faintly in the air, mixed with the scent of fresh bread from the bakery section. I needed some basic things: milk, bread, eggs, coffee. Nothing fancy. As I wandered toward the dairy aisle, I noticed that the store's usual soft background music wasn't playing. The speakers were silent. Normally, some mellow tune or quiet pop would fill the space, but now there was only silence, broken occasionally by the hum of the refrigerators. That struck me as odd, but I pushed it aside. A man stood a few feet away by the eggs, wearing a dark hoodie, hands shoved in his pockets, head down. He seemed out of place for this hour. Most people were either in a hurry or the store staff restocking. I nodded in greeting, but he didn't respond, didn't even glance up. I felt the first prickle of unease. I grabbed a carton of milk and moved to the bread aisle, my footsteps echoing softly on the linoleum. The store was too quiet, too still. From the corner of my eye, I thought I saw movement near the frozen food section, but when I turned, there was nothing, just empty aisles. The man in the hoodie was gone. As I reached for a loaf of bread, the lights flickered once, just a quick, subtle flicker, but it made the shadows deepen along the shelves. I swallowed hard. I decided to finish quickly and check out. At the checkout, the lines were empty, not a single customer or cashier. A voice came on over the paging system, distorted and slow. "Attention, store will be closing in 10 minutes. Please proceed to checkout." That was strange. The store was open 24 hours. Why close now? I looked toward the exits. The automatic doors were closed and locked. I tried them. No response. Panic began to rise. I checked my phone. No signal. I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Heavy. I spun around, but no one was there. I tried calling out, but my voice felt thin and weak in the heavy silence. The lights flickered again, then went out. Emergency red lights clicked on, casting eerie shadows. I shined my phone's flashlight around. The man in the hoodie was back, standing a few feet away, face obscured. His eyes were black, empty. I stepped back, tripping over a display of canned soup. He didn't move, just watched. The store seemed to close in around me, the aisles stretching endlessly. Whispers echoed, unintelligible but mocking. The air grew icy cold. I ran toward the emergency exit signs. Doors wouldn't budge. The slow, rhythmic clapping began, echoing through the aisles all around me. I covered my ears, stumbling blindly. Suddenly, I was alone again. The lights flickered back on. The doors unlocked. The store was empty except for me. I left immediately. The next day, I called the store manager. He looked confused. We were fully staffed overnight, and then no reports of issues. Cameras show you entered, but no footage after that. No one else saw the man in the hoodie. No one heard the clapping. I never went back. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I can still hear it, the slow clapping, the faint whispers, calling me back. Story the end. Working overnight at a grocery store wasn't something I ever imagined myself doing. But life has a way of steering you into strange places when you're young and scrambling to make ends meet. I was 24, freshly out of college with nothing lined up yet, and took the graveyard shift job at Miller's Market, a small, independently owned grocery store nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Miller's Market wasn't fancy. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed incessantly, casting a harsh glare over the cracked linoleum floors. The aisles were narrow, the shelves lined with familiar brands that had been sitting there longer than they should have. The store had been around for decades, and you could feel the weight of its age in the creaks of the wooden beams and the musty scent that wafted from the back storage rooms. My shifts started at 11 p.m. and ran until 7 a.m., the hours most people were asleep. On the surface, it was peaceful. Few customers, easy work, and plenty of time to zone out. But it quickly became clear that beneath the humdrum of stocking shelves and ringing up the occasional night owl, there was something off about that place. The first time I noticed something wasn't right was during my second week. I was midway through a boring stretch of shelf stocking when I heard the front door chime. That little ding-ding noise every time someone entered or left. I looked up, expecting to see a customer, but the aisle was empty. I checked the security camera feed on the register monitor. No one was near the entrance. I shrugged it off, assuming a glitch or the wind setting off the sensor. But then the chime sounded again, a few minutes later, and again no one appeared on the footage. This happened several times over the next hour, and it made my skin crawl. There's an odd kind of vulnerability working nights alone, and these unexplained noises gnawed at that. Around 2 a.m., I decided to take a break near the front entrance. The store was silent except for the faint hum of refrigeration units and the distant ticking of the clock above the deli counter. That's when I noticed something else. The freezers, usually humming steadily, were oddly quiet. As I glanced toward them, the heavy walk-in freezer door creaked open slowly, even though I hadn't heard anyone near it. I froze. Then it slammed shut with a thud. I walked over cautiously and tried the handle. It was locked tight, like always. Curious, asked the manager Carl about it the next day. He went pale and told me never to go near the freezer after 1 a.m., especially alone. I pressed him for details, but he just said the place had some history, and it was better if I didn't ask. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing small things. Products moved on shelves I was sure I had just stocked. Strange whispers that I couldn't place. The occasional shadow flickering out of the corner of my eye. One night, at about 4 a.m., I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The only sound was the distant drip of a leaking pipe. I checked the back storage room. It was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched clung to me. The oddest encounter was with an older woman who came in one night. She was bundled in a thick coat even though it was summer. She looked around with wide, frightened eyes and whispered, "I'm looking for someone." I asked who. She just shook her head and left without buying anything. I never saw her again. One night the power flickered and went out completely. Emergency lights bathed the store in a sickly red glow. I was alone and heard faint music playing from the deli speakers, even though the system was off. Then came the knocking, 3 slow knocks on the freezer door. I held my breath. The knocking turned into a scratching sound like nails scraping metal. I ran to the front and locked the doors. Carl came in early that morning and told me about a boy who had disappeared in the store decades ago, said to haunt the place. I quit 2 days later. Miller's Market closed not long after. Sometimes when I drive past the empty building, I swear I hear the door chime ring just once. Story. The end. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering sporadically as the late summer heat pressed against the glass windows of Miller's grocery. I was working the closing shift that Thursday night, something I'd done more times than I could count over the past 2 years. The store was on the edge of a small Midwestern town, a place where everybody knew your name, and the grocery store felt like an extension of the community living room. Most nights, it was slow. Just a handful of last-minute shoppers, the hum of the refrigeration units, and the occasional beep of the cash register. But this night was different. It started around 10:45 p.m., about an hour before closing. I was restocking the shelves in aisle 6, the canned vegetable section, when the automatic doors at the front chimed softly. I glanced up, expecting the usual stragglers rushing in to grab a pack of cigarettes or some soda before we closed. Instead, a man walked in looking like he belonged in a different decade. He was tall, thin, dressed in a dark trench coat that seemed too heavy for the late summer air, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. His shoes made no sound as he moved. I stepped back behind the counter and caught a glimpse of him disappearing between aisle 10 and the frozen foods. I noticed how still he was, almost like a statue among the flickering fluorescent lights. I called out politely, "Can I help you find something, sir?" He didn't respond. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled. I shrugged it off and returned to stocking cans of green beans, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. 10 minutes later, I heard a faint tapping noise echoing from aisle 12, the baking supplies. It was soft at first, like someone lightly drumming their fingers against a shelf. Then it grew louder, more insistent. Curious, I grabbed a handheld flashlight and walked toward the aisle. When I rounded the corner, the tapping stopped. The aisle was empty. The shelves were perfectly aligned, no cans out of place, no sign of anyone passing through. I shone the flashlight down the length of the aisle, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever had been there, but saw nothing. Shrugging, I headed back toward the checkout counter, but something about the silence unsettled me. The store usually buzzed with the hum of electricity, and faint music piped through the speakers, but now it was eerily quiet. I checked the security monitor behind the register. The cameras showed the man wandering slowly through the frozen food section. His movements were deliberate, almost unnatural. Then, on the screen for aisle 12, the lights flickered for a split second. In that brief frame, I saw a shadow standing at the end of the aisle, too tall and thin to be one of the mannequins or a normal shopper. The shadow seemed to lean slightly forward, as if observing. I rubbed my eyes, but when the video resumed, the shadow was gone. I blinked and felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. Suddenly, the store's PA system crackled and a low, distorted whisper filled the space. "Help me." I froze. "Hello?" I called out softly, heart pounding. Static hissed through the speaker again, then silence. My hands shook as I reached for the walkie-talkie to call the manager, but the device was dead. No response, no signal. My phone was also inexplicably dead. I turned back toward the aisles, scanning every corner with my flashlight. The man in the trench coat was now standing just past aisle 14, near the cleaning supplies. I called out again, louder this time. "Sir, you need to leave. We're closing soon." He didn't respond. His head was tilted oddly, and his eyes, pale and almost glowing, were fixed on me. I took a step back, knocking over a metal rack with a loud clang. He snapped his head toward me, a slow, deliberate movement that made my skin crawl. Then, without warning, the store plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long red shadows down every aisle. I felt an icy breeze brush past me. "Jason." The whisper was right behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly. No one. The man had vanished. Then a soft tapping started again, but this time it was coming from the stockroom door behind the checkout counter. I hesitated, gripping the flashlight like a weapon. The tapping grew louder, faster. I slowly approached the door. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. The door swung open on its own with a creak. Darkness inside. I stepped in. The door slammed shut behind me. The temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath. And then the whisper came again, right next to my ear. "Don't look back." My flashlight flickered, then died. I was left in complete darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. No light, no signal, just silence. Then footsteps echoed from the far corner of the stockroom, slow, deliberate, closer, closer. And then a hand gripped my shoulder. I screamed. The lights flickered back on. I was alone. My heart hammered as I bolted out of the stockroom and toward the front door. The automatic doors opened. I ran out into the warm night air, never looking back. The next day, I told the manager I was quitting. Miller's Market closed for renovations shortly after. Some nights, when I drive past the empty store, I swear I hear tapping from inside. And I never work nights anymore. Story the end. Melissa worked the closing shift at a small grocery store called Ridgeway Market, nestled in a quiet suburb of Dayton, Ohio. The store wasn't much, just a typical local grocery with narrow aisles, flickering fluorescent lights, and a modest selection of fresh produce and packaged goods. She'd worked there for over a year, long enough to know the routine, the regular customers, and the quirks of the old building. On this particular Thursday night, Melissa was scheduled to work from 4 p.m. until 11 p.m. It was near closing time when she finished her last register transaction. The store was mostly empty, just a few lingering customers finishing their shopping, and the usual hum of the refrigerators filled the quiet space. After her shift, Melissa decided to stay a bit later to stock the dairy aisle, hoping to finish quickly so she could get home and rest. She grabbed a box of yogurt from the back storage and headed toward aisle 5. The overhead lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows that seemed to move just beyond her peripheral vision. As she stocked the shelves, she noticed a man standing near the end of the aisle. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. His posture was rigid, and he wasn't looking at anything in particular, just staring straight ahead, unmoving. Melissa stopped what she was doing and glanced at him. "Can I help you find something?" she asked cautiously. The man didn't respond. He didn't even blink. Unease settled in her stomach. She tried to look past him and continue her work, but her eyes kept drifting back. He remained motionless. She cleared her throat and said, "Sir, the store is closing soon. You might want to head to the checkout." Still no response. Melissa decided to finish her stocking quickly and head toward the front of the store. When she turned back to grab another box, the man was gone. She shook her head and chalked it up to tiredness. Making her way toward the checkout, she noticed the overhead music had stopped and the fluorescent lights were dimming more than usual. The usual comforting hum of the refrigeration units seemed louder, almost like a low growl. At register 3, Jake, the night shift cashier, was counting down his till. Melissa told him about the man she'd seen. "Yeah, some folks have been talking about weird stuff here lately," Jake said quietly. "Lights flickering, sounds nobody can explain. Even a couple of the regulars said they felt like someone was watching them." Melissa frowned. "That's creepy." Jake shrugged. "I don't put much stock into it. Old buildings do weird things." The store's PA system crackled suddenly, and an announcement played. "Attention customers, the store will close in 15 minutes. Please proceed to the checkout." Melissa gathered her things and headed out through the automatic doors into the night. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for a few stray shopping carts clattering softly in the breeze. As she reached her car, she glanced over her shoulder and spotted the same man standing near a lamppost a few rows away. His face remained hidden beneath the low brim of his cap, and he didn't move. Melissa hurried to her car, unlocked the door, and got inside. She locked the doors and started the engine. As she looked back through the rear window, the man was gone. Driving away, a cold shiver ran down her spine. That night, Melissa barely slept. The man's blank, unmoving stare haunted her thoughts. The next day at work, she mentioned it to a few coworkers, but most shrugged it off as stress or imagination. Over the following week, strange incidents began piling up. The lights in the store flickered more frequently, often plunging aisles into sudden darkness for several seconds. Employees reported hearing tapping noises behind the shelves when no one was supposed to be there. Several customers complained of feeling an unsettling presence while shopping late at night. One evening, Melissa was alone stocking shelves after the store had closed. The tapping started again, soft, slow, deliberate, coming from the back near the loading dock. She cautiously followed the sound, her heart pounding. When she rounded the corner to the storage room, the door slammed shut behind her. The lights flickered violently, then went out, leaving her in pitch black. Her phone's flashlight app was dead. She froze as a whisper brushed her ear. Leave. Frantically, she fumbled for the doorknob and twisted it open. She ran down the aisle toward the front exit. The automatic doors didn't open. She grabbed the handle and pulled, but they were locked. A shadow appeared in the emergency light, a tall figure wearing a dark coat and baseball cap, the same man she'd seen before. He didn't speak, but raised a finger to his lips as if to say, "Quiet." Melissa screamed, pounding on the doors. Moments later, the store manager appeared, flicking the lights back on and unlocking the doors. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his face pale. Police were called and an investigation followed, but no evidence of trespassers or break-ins was found. The man in the dark coat remained a mystery. Over the next few weeks, several employees quit, unwilling to return to the unsettling atmosphere. Eventually, Ridgeway Market closed indefinitely, citing safety concerns. Melissa moved away from Dayton shortly after, haunted by the memory of that man and the dark presence that seemed to linger in the store's aisles. Even years later, she avoids grocery stores at night. Some places hold secrets better left undisturbed. Story the end. The moment I stepped into the fluorescent glow of the grocery store just after 10 p.m., I felt a weight settle over me. Something heavy in the air that wasn't just the usual hum of refrigerators or the buzz of flickering lights. I'd worked the night shift at this small-town supermarket on the outskirts of Cincinnati for nearly 2 years, mostly alone after closing time until the next morning's crew showed up. The late shift was mostly uneventful, some stocking, cleaning, the occasional wandering shopper, but that night the store felt different, almost like it was holding its breath. It was October, early fall, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones even indoors. I put on the store's navy blue jacket and clipped on my name tag, greeting the empty aisles with a nod as if they were old friends. The air smelled faintly of spilled coffee and stale bread, the usual mix in this place after a long day of customers. But tonight, there was something else, something metallic, like blood or rust, faint but unmistakable. I tried to shrug it off and headed toward aisle 3 to start restocking the canned goods. The store was eerily quiet, except for the steady hum of the refrigeration units and the soft footsteps of my boots on the tile. I liked the solitude most nights. It gave me time to think, to zone out, and listen to music through my earbuds. But I kept the volume low, aware that the silence could feel oppressive in here, especially at night. As I lined up cans of green beans and corn, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of shadow between the aisles near the bakery. I glanced up, but the aisle was empty. Probably a trick of the light, or maybe a stray box that had shifted on the shelf. Still, a chill ran down my spine. I continued working, but kept stealing glances toward the bakery section. The lights above it flickered briefly, then steadied. I told myself I was just tired. About 30 minutes into my shift, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a shopping cart rolling slowly over the linoleum floor. It was faint, but clear, the scraping wheels making a low, irregular rhythm. I paused, The can I was holding frozen halfway to the shelf. The store was supposed to be empty. I hadn't seen any customers come in since I arrived. I put down the can gently and moved cautiously toward aisle 7, where the sound seemed to be coming from. My heart picked up its pace, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. The cart's scraping grew louder, then stopped suddenly. I rounded the corner and saw the cart, empty, rolling slightly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. It wobbled back and forth slowly, then settled still. I shined my flashlight around, looking for anyone hiding, but the aisle was empty. "Hello?" I called softly, voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I backed away, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I went back to the security monitor in the break room and pulled up the camera feed for aisle 7. The cart sat still on the screen. I zoomed in, watching closely, but saw no one. Then the feed cut to static for a few seconds before returning. I felt a creeping sense of unease. Later, around midnight, I was stocking the frozen foods near the back when I heard a faint whisper, almost like a sigh. "Help." The word was so soft I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then it came again. "Help me." I spun around, flashlight sweeping the aisles. No one there. I told myself it was just the store's creaky old pipes, or maybe a customer mumbling somewhere outside the camera's view. I tried calling my manager on the walkie-talkie, but the static was thick, no reply. Then the lights flickered and went out, plunging the store into darkness, except for the dim red glow of emergency exit signs. My flashlight cut through the gloom, but I felt suddenly very small and alone. I started to head toward the electrical panel to check the breakers. As I walked, I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging, deliberate. I stopped, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped too. I turned quickly. Nothing. Just empty aisles stretching away. I hurried to the breaker room, but when I opened the panel, all breakers were in the on position. The silence pressed in on me. Suddenly, the store's PA system crackled to life, a voice whispering through the speakers. "You shouldn't be here." I dropped the flashlight, scrambling backward. Then the lights surged back on. I looked around. No one in sight. I grabbed the flashlight and headed for the front doors. They were locked tight. I pulled and pushed, but the doors didn't budge. Panic rising, I tried calling 911 on my cell. No signal. I felt the hair on my arms stand up again. The temperature dropped noticeably. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, something dark gliding just beyond the edge of the light in aisle 5. "Show yourself," I shouted. Silence. Then the voice came again, louder this time, right behind me. "Help me." I whipped around, empty. I ran to the break room and locked the door behind me. My breath came fast. For the next hour, the whispering voices echoed faintly, the lights flickering, shadows dancing just out of sight. When the morning shift arrived, the manager found me curled up on the floor, shaking. The police came and searched the store but found nothing unusual, no signs of break-in, no one reported missing. I quit the next day, but sometimes when I drive past that grocery store late at night, I swear I see a faint silhouette standing by the windows, watching, waiting. Story the end. The night shift at the grocery store was supposed to be routine. I had worked there for over a year, mostly closing shifts, and I was used to the quiet hours when the aisles were empty and the fluorescent lights buzzed low overhead. This store was the kind of place that didn't see much foot traffic after 11 p.m., especially on weeknights. It was tucked away in a small American town, the sort where everybody knew each other, or at least thought they did. Most nights, it was just me, the stock crew, and the occasional late-night customer grabbing a snack or an emergency item. That night, I arrived at my usual time, just before 10 p.m. The air was thick with humidity from an early summer storm that had just passed, and the parking lot was slick with rain. Inside, the store smelled like a mix of bleach and stale produce, the familiar scent that never quite left the place even after all the cleaning. I clocked in, grabbed my vest, and headed straight for aisle 7, where I was supposed to finish restocking canned goods. I worked my way down the aisle, stacking soups and vegetables, wiping down shelves, and humming along to the soft pop music playing through the speakers. The store was quiet, except for the distant hum of the refrigeration units and the occasional beep from a register. Around 11 p.m., a man walked in, probably in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. He didn't say hello or acknowledge me as he wandered slowly through the aisles, eyes fixed on the floor. That was the first thing that made me uneasy. Usually customers nod or smile, especially in a small town, but this guy seemed almost off. I kept an eye on him as I moved to the dairy section. He lingered near the bread aisle but didn't pick anything up. Instead, he just stared blankly, like he was waiting for something or someone. When I glanced his way again, he was gone. I checked the aisles nearby. Empty. That set my nerves on edge. I shrugged it off as a random late-night shopper and continued my work. At midnight, I took my break in the employee lounge. I was sipping cold coffee and scrolling through my phone when the store's overhead lights flickered briefly. I glanced up, but everything seemed fine. Then, a low buzzing came through the PA system. It was soft and indistinct at first, like a radio trying to tune in. I went back onto the floor, curious and a little uneasy. The buzzing got louder, and then, clearer, I heard whispers. Faint, urgent whispers that seemed to come from the aisles near the frozen foods. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I followed the sound anyway. As I reached aisle 12, I saw the man again. Only this time, his face was fully visible. He was pale, with deep-set eyes that seemed hollow, almost glassy. He didn't move or speak, just stared at the shelves, unmoving like a statue. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I stepped closer. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. Then, without warning, the man turned toward me, eyes locked on mine. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I took a step back, heart pounding. Then he vanished. 1 second he was there, the next, just gone. I blinked and looked around. No one else in the aisle. I hurried toward the front of the store, trying to shake the unease. At the checkout, the night manager, Carl, was counting cash and didn't notice my pale face. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but he just shrugged. "Must be tired," he said. I wasn't convinced. Later, as I stalked the snack aisle, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly. No one. I heard a soft whisper right at my ear. "Leave." I spun around, but the aisle was empty. I grabbed my radio to call Carl, but the battery was dead. The store lights flickered again, then the power cut out. Emergency lights kicked on, casting an eerie red glow. The store was silent, except for the hum of the emergency generators. I tried the doors. Locked. My phone had no signal. I was trapped. Then, from the darkened aisles, the whispers came back, growing louder. I ran toward the break room. The door was locked, but I found the janitor's key hanging nearby and unlocked it. I barricaded myself inside, trembling. Through the small window, I saw shadows moving outside. I heard the whispers turn into a growl. Suddenly, the power came back on. The store was empty again. Carl found me an hour later, shaking in the break room. He told me no one else had been in the store. But I knew what I saw. I quit the next day. The grocery store still stands, but I never set foot inside after midnight again. Story the end. Working the night shift at the supermarket wasn't something I ever thought would be a big deal. Henderson's Market was your typical neighborhood grocery store in a small Ohio town. Nothing fancy, just enough to grab your groceries late or early before heading home. I'd been working there for about 8 months, usually closing shifts from 7 p.m. to midnight, occasionally staying a little later if needed. It was quiet most nights and, honestly, a pretty easy gig. But the night that changed everything started off just like any other. It was late September, a Friday night, and the weather had taken a turn for the worse. The sky was thick with storm clouds, and a steady rain hammered the pavement outside. I pulled into the empty parking lot around 6:45 p.m., grateful for the heat in my old sedan as the wind howled around the corners of the building. Inside, the store was dim but warm. I flipped on the fluorescent lights and did a quick walkthrough, making sure everything was in place before the evening crowd trickled in. The first few hours were slow, just a few regulars grabbing their usual late-night essentials: milk, beer, some snacks. The usual faces, nodding politely as they passed by. I was stacking canned soup on aisle 4 when I noticed an older man lingering near the frozen food section, just staring at the ice cream freezer. He seemed out of place, even by Henderson's standards. He wore a dark coat despite the mild temperature inside, and his eyes darted nervously across the shelves. I glanced away, thinking he might just be tired or distracted. Then I heard it. A soft tapping sound coming from the back storage area. At first, I thought it was a delivery or maybe some loose pipe rattling in the wind outside, but the noise was deliberate. like someone knocking lightly on a wooden door. I stepped toward the back corridor leading to the storage rooms and employee break area. But when I peeked inside, no one was there. Just boxes stacked neatly and the hum of the refrigeration units. I shrugged it off and returned to my task. But every so often, the tapping would start again, always the same slow rhythm, echoing faintly down the hallway. It gave me an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. Around 10:15 p.m., the store had quieted considerably. I was at the checkout counter cleaning when the store's intercom suddenly crackled to life. Jerry, the manager, rarely used it, especially this late. The voice that came through wasn't Jerry's, though. It was distorted, low, almost like it was being played through a broken radio. "Can you hear me?" the voice whispered. My skin prickled. I called out, "Jerry, is that you?" No response. I checked my phone. No signal. The rain was coming down harder, battering the windows and roof. The store's old fluorescent lights flickered as thunder rumbled in the distance. I was about to call it a night when a chilling sensation passed over me. I turned toward aisle 6, the frozen food section, and spotted a small figure standing near the end of the aisle. A little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a white dress that looked soaked. Her dark hair hung in wet strands over her face. I blinked, and she was gone. I walked carefully toward the spot where I'd seen her, but the aisle was empty. Then I heard it again. The tapping. This time right behind me, coming from the produce section. I spun around. Nothing. I started to get that cold sweat feeling creeping down my back, the kind where your instincts scream to get out, but your body is frozen in place. On a whim, I checked the security cameras. The screens showed the usual empty aisles and parking lot, except for one camera focused on aisle 9. On the monitor, I saw a shadow move quickly across the floor, a dark shape that didn't match any human figure. It stretched and distorted unnaturally. The lights flickered wildly. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath. My heart was racing now. I fumbled for the walkie-talkie on the counter and called Jerry. No answer. Then the store alarm started blaring without cause. I rushed to the control panel to silence it, but the keypad was unresponsive. Suddenly, the voice on the intercom returned, clearer this time. "Stay." I bolted for the front doors, fumbling with the keys in the dark. Rain pelted my face as I finally unlocked the door and dashed outside. Safe in my car, I glanced back at the store's glowing windows. And there in the front window, I saw the little girl's face, eyes black and hollow, mouth stretched in a silent scream. I never worked another night shift after that. Story the end. It was supposed to be another routine closing shift at Fresh Life Market, the kind of night where I could count the number of late customers on one hand and still have fingers left over. My name's Dana, and I've worked at the grocery store for about 6 years now, mostly evenings, usually managing the registers, sometimes doing restock when things get slow. The place is in a quiet suburb in Ohio, wedged between a laundromat and a dollar store. Not exactly the setting for horror movies, unless your idea of horror is cleaning the meat slicer at midnight. That Wednesday night started like any other. I clocked in at 4 p.m., right as the early dinner crowd was trickling through. Moms grabbing last-minute ingredients, tired workers grabbing rotisserie chickens and 6 packs of beer, retirees moving slow with coupons in hand. I had the closing shift along with my coworker Jamie, who was handling produce, and our shift manager Mark. We'd been short-staffed all month, so it was just the 3 of us running the floor until 11 p.m. By 9:45, the store was nearly empty, just 1 or 2 customers in the aisles. The lights buzzed overhead like always, casting that sterile white glow that made everything feel a little too quiet when the foot traffic died down. I was standing behind register 3, scrolling through my phone between glances at the front doors, counting the minutes until close. Mark came around the corner of aisle 6, holding a clipboard and chewing on the end of a pen. "Jamie's cleaning up in produce," he said. "You mind grabbing carts from the lot before it gets too dark?" "Sure," I said, slipping my phone into my back pocket. Outside, the air was thick and still. The parking lot had that eerie, empty feel to it. Just a handful of cars left, mostly employees. I gathered the loose carts into a chain, pushing them toward the corral. That's when I saw it. A dark sedan parked all the way in the back corner of the lot, no lights on, just sitting there. At first, I figured it belonged to someone at the dollar store. but when I paused to look, I noticed the driver's side door was slightly ajar. I couldn't see inside, just pitch black through the windshield, but something about it gave me goosebumps. I finished pushing the carts inside quicker than usual and didn't look back. Inside, Jamie had finished stacking apples and was headed toward the back room. Mark was on the floor, taking stock of frozen goods. I went back behind the register and leaned on the counter, waiting. At 10:08, the automatic doors slid open with a hiss. A man walked in. I didn't recognize him, which was unusual. We got a lot of regulars, and the unfamiliar ones usually stood out. He was tall, maybe in his mid-50s, wearing a heavy coat despite the late summer heat. His face was pale, waxy even, like he hadn't been out in the sun for a while. He walked with a kind of stiff, deliberate pace, not browsing, not looking at signs, just heading straight toward the meat department. "Late-night dinner run," I muttered under my breath, watching him from behind the register. I glanced down at my phone, barely 30 seconds passed, and when I looked up again, he was gone. I mean, gone. He should have still been walking down the aisle. It was impossible to get to the back of the store that fast. I leaned over the counter, looking toward the meat section. Nothing. I wasn't the paranoid type, but something about the way he moved, like he was moving faster than he should, yet not running, made my stomach tighten. "Mark?" I said through the walkie clipped to my vest. "You see that guy who just came in?" There was a pause, static crackling. "What guy?" "He walked in a minute ago, tall, coat, went toward meat. No one's back here. I've been standing next to the butcher station this whole time." I didn't say anything else. I just looked at the door. The motion sensor hadn't triggered again. 10 minutes passed. No one came to the front. No sounds from the back. Jamie came up from the stockroom with a clipboard, looking annoyed. "You see someone walk in?" I asked her. "Who?" "Tall guy, coat." She blinked at me. "It's 90 degrees outside." "Exactly." Jamie frowned and walked over to the door, peering outside. "Only car I see is yours and Mark's." "What about the black sedan?" I asked. She gave me a look. "What sedan?" "It was parked out back earlier, left side of the lot. There's nothing there now." I went outside again just to be sure. She was right. The lot was empty. No sedan, no sign anyone had been there at all. It unsettled me more than I cared to admit. I went back inside, trying to brush it off, telling myself maybe I was just seeing things. At 10:32, the lights in aisle 5 started flickering. It wasn't the first time. They'd been temperamental for months. But the way they flickered tonight in a rhythmic, almost purposeful pattern was strange. I stared at them for a moment, then got back on the walkie. "Mark, you near aisle 5? "Not now." "Why?" "Lights are acting up again." "I'll check it out in a sec." But he didn't check. 5 minutes passed, then 10. No sign of Mark. Jamie went to the back room to grab paper towels and didn't come back either. I waited until 10:45, then left the register and walked toward the back, calling out, "Jamie?" No answer. "Mark?" Silence. I made it to the produce section and stopped dead in my tracks. There was a smear of something dark on the floor, trailing from the meat section toward the back room. It looked like blood. Not a spill. Too thick, too clotted. I backed away slowly and reached for my phone to call Mark. No signal. That never happened in the store. I ran to the front, to the landline behind the service desk, picked it up, pressed 911. Dead line. No dial tone, just static. Then the power cut out. For a split second, the store went completely black. Then the emergency lights kicked in, dim orange glows that barely lit the floor. Shadows moved in the corners. I was breathing fast now, trying not to panic. I grabbed the flashlight from under the service counter and headed back toward the stockroom. I told myself that maybe Mark slipped and hit his head. Maybe Jamie fainted. But the streak of blood said otherwise. I pushed open the backroom door slowly. It was empty. No crates overturned, no mess, just silent and cold. Too cold. The temperature in there felt more like a walk-in freezer. Then I heard the hum. It was coming from behind the supply shelves. Low, vibrating, almost like a chant or growl. I couldn't tell which. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, and the beam landed on something I can barely describe. It looked like the man from earlier, only taller now. His neck stretched too long, his arms hung at his sides like ropes. His coat was soaked through, dripping onto the floor, even though the room was bone dry. His face was warped, mouth too wide, eyes like black pits. He turned toward the light. I dropped the flashlight. I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the swinging doors, past the registers, toward the entrance. The automatic doors didn't open. I slammed against them once, twice. Behind me, footsteps, slow, wet. I fumbled with the emergency override panel, typing in the four-digit manager code I remembered from training years ago. The panel beeped, denied. I tried again, wrong again. Behind me, the wet, dragging footsteps were getting closer. I didn't try a third time. I turned and ran toward the break room. There was a fire exit there. Maybe it would open. Maybe the alarm would go off and summon someone, anyone. I pushed through the door. Mark was inside, or what used to be Mark. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, skin pale and translucent, mouth wide open as if screaming silently. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there like a puppet hung on invisible strings. I screamed. The fire door behind him opened slowly, on its own. And standing there was the man. He stepped inside, dripping water from nowhere. I swear I saw worms crawling out from under his coat, down his arms. His mouth opened, and I heard a sound like hundreds of whispering voices all at once. I don't remember what happened next. I blacked out. When I came to, it was morning. The store lights were on. Music was playing softly overhead. A woman from the bakery was walking past me with a tray of muffins. I was on the floor behind the service counter. Mark was clocking in at the time clock like nothing happened. Jamie was laughing at something in the break room. No blood. No man. No cold back room. I asked them what happened last night. They both looked confused. Said I left early. Said I wasn't feeling well. I checked the cameras in the manager's office. The tapes for the night before were missing. The logbook didn't show any entries past 9 p.m. I tried to brush it off like a breakdown or hallucination. But sometimes late at night, I'll be walking past the meat department and see wet footprints leading toward the back room. No one else notices. No one else ever sees him, but I do. And he's always wearing that coat. Story the end. I started working at a 24-hour grocery store called Meadowbrook Market in the fall of 2015. It was one of those chain stores you'd find in small towns all across America, big enough to have everything, but never quite busy enough to feel alive, especially at night. I had just turned 21 and was in that awkward stage between figuring out college and trying to pay rent on time. Meadowbrook wasn't glamorous, but it paid just above minimum wage, and since I didn't have any other options, I took the night shift. Midnight to 8 a.m., 5 nights a week. The store sat just off Route 40, about 2 miles outside the main part of town. On the surface, it looked like any other grocery store. Automatic glass doors, a couple of carts littering the parking lot, flickering fluorescent lights. But from the first week I started, something about the place felt off. Maybe it was how empty it felt in the early hours, or maybe it was how none of the overnight employees stuck around long. Either way, I noticed things pretty quickly that didn't add up. I was trained by a guy named Don who worked there for about 6 months before handing in his keys without a word. He showed me the usual stuff: how to restock shelves, rotate dairy, clean up aisle spills, and most importantly, how to keep the back storage room organized. He also made one comment, which at the time I brushed off. "Don't spend too much time in the meat freezer after 3 a.m., he told me one night. "Why?" I laughed. "You scared I'll get locked in?" He didn't laugh. Just looked at me, dead serious. "Just don't." When I asked him about it again the next night, he pretended he never said anything. The staff was small, especially overnight. Usually it was me and 1 or 2 others. Most nights, I worked with Clara, a 40-something mother of 3 who used the night shift as a second job. She was quiet, kind, and didn't like to gossip much. Then there was Marcus, who did maintenance and handled deliveries. He was weird. Not in a dangerous way, just odd. He always kept to himself and wore those huge noise-canceling headphones when he wasn't around customers. I once caught him talking to himself in the storage room. He stopped as soon as he noticed me. "Old habit," he said, not making eye contact. I didn't push it. The first couple of months were uneventful, except for small things I started noticing. Lights would flicker more than they should in the cereal aisle. The loudspeaker would pop on with static around 3:10 a.m. almost every night, even though no one was using it. Sometimes I'd stock shelves in one aisle, then walk back to grab more product and find everything I'd just stocked on the floor. I assumed I was just tired or careless. Then the freezer door started acting strange. Our meat freezer was huge, about the size of a small garage, with metal racks lining the walls and a giant industrial fan that hummed constantly. It had one heavy door that closed with a hydraulic arm. You had to yank it hard to open it, and it would slam shut if you didn't prop it. One night, around 3:20 a.m., I went in to restock some ground beef and chicken breasts. I was only in there for a few minutes. When I turned to leave, the door wouldn't open. At first, I thought I'd just pulled the handle wrong, but it wasn't budging. I pounded on it and waited. Nothing. My phone was in my locker, and I hadn't told anyone I was going in. Panic started to set in. I hit the door with my shoulder and screamed for Clara or Marcus, hoping one of them was nearby. Then, all at once, the door swung open on its own. I stumbled out and looked around. No one was there. I told Clara about it later, and she just gave me a look. That happened to you too? I asked. She nodded slowly, then glanced around to make sure we were alone. I don't go in there alone anymore, she said. Not after what happened to John. I'd never heard of a John. He was the night manager a few years ago. One night, he didn't clock out. They found him the next morning in the freezer. Dead. Not frozen, just dead. Looked like he had a heart attack, but his face... She trailed off. They said he was screaming when they found him. I tried to brush it off, but that image stuck with me. Things got worse over the next couple of weeks. The store had a security system, and part of my job was to review camera footage whenever there was a spill or a product went missing. One night, we had a glass jar of spaghetti sauce shatter in aisle 4. When I pulled the footage, I saw the jar just fall off the shelf with no one around. But that wasn't the weird part. Around 3:12 a.m., a figure walked across the end of the aisle. Tall, thin, pale, no distinct features, just a shape. I paused the footage and rewound it a few times. The figure didn't appear in any other camera, just that one frame in that one moment. I showed Marcus. He took one look and said, "Don't show that to the manager." Why? He took off his headphones and leaned in, because they'll pretend it's not there, like they always do. He didn't elaborate. The next night, I saw it in person. I was restocking baking supplies near the back of the store when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure walking past the end of the aisle. Tall, pale, moving smoothly, almost like it was floating. I ran after it, thinking maybe it was a prank. But when I turned the corner, the aisle was empty. I told myself it was a trick of the light. Sleep deprivation. Something. But then I started hearing the footsteps. They started the following week. Always around the same time, between 3 and 4 a.m., a soft, steady walking sound coming from the next aisle over. When I checked, no one would be there. Sometimes it was accompanied by breathing. Shallow, raspy breathing, like someone with a bad chest cold standing just around the corner. Clara heard it too. "I hear it almost every night," she whispered. I stopped looking for it. One night, I was cleaning up a spill in aisle 9, paper products and cleaning supplies. I was crouched down wiping up detergent when I felt something behind me. The air turned cold, not freezer cold, but like someone had opened a door in winter. I turned around, and for a split second, I saw it. The figure. Closer this time. No face, just the impression of one. 2 dark spots where eyes should be. Skin the color of old wax. It was gone in a blink, but I dropped the mop and ran. I told the day manager, Eric, the next morning. He gave me a tight-lipped smile and said, "You know how many cameras are in this store? If there was something, we'd have seen it." I wanted to tell him about the footage, but I knew he'd just write it off. Things escalated when Clara quit. She didn't give notice, didn't even clock out, just left one night during her break and never came back. I texted her a few times, even called, but never got a response. I heard through the grapevine that she moved out of town. After that, it was just me and Marcus. He barely spoke those last few weeks. One night, I found him in the break room, scribbling something on the back of an old receipt. It was a symbol, looked like a circle with jagged lines through it. When he noticed me, he crumpled it up and shoved it in his pocket. "Protection," he said. "You should carry one too." I laughed nervously. "Protection from what?" He didn't answer. The last straw happened on a Wednesday. It was just after 3 a.m. I was reorganizing end caps near the pharmacy section. The store was silent except for the buzzing lights. I felt that same cold air again. Then I heard the loudspeaker crackle. A voice came through, garbled, static-laced, Leave. Just that. One word. It didn't sound like anyone I knew. It was low and rough, like it was spoken through water. I froze. Looked around. Marcus was nowhere in sight. I ran to the front, heart pounding, and found him standing near the exit, staring outside through the glass doors. "There's something out there," he said. I looked. Nothing but the parking lot. "You saw it?" I asked. "No," he said, "but it saw me." I quit the next day. Didn't finish my shift. Left my badge and keys in the break room and walked out. Never went back. I heard a month later the store had to shut down for electrical renovations. Never reopened. Marcus disappeared too. No one knew where he went. His phone was disconnected and his apartment had been emptied. Sometimes I still dream about Meadowbrook Market. I'll be walking down those aisles, hearing footsteps behind me, knowing if I turn around I'll see it again, that pale, faceless thing. And every time I hear a loudspeaker crackle in real life, I flinch. I never take night shifts anymore. Never. Story the end. The first time I started working at the Dawson Street grocery, I figured it would be temporary, just something to hold me over after I dropped out of community college and needed to start helping with bills again. The store was tucked between a Dollar Value and an old dry cleaner's that had been closed for years. It didn't look like much. Flickering neon, open 24 hours sign, fading yellow paint around the windows, but they were hiring, and it was within walking distance from my mom's house. I was 23, broke, and not exactly flooded with options. The manager, Warren, hired me on the spot. He was in his mid-50s, skin dry and flaky, but somehow always sweaty. He wore a beige windbreaker even in August and had one of those too wide smiles that made you wonder if he'd ever actually been happy in his life. He walked me through the orientation himself, most of which consisted of rules like don't go into the walk-in freezer alone, always check the camera feed if the doorbell chime rings and no one's there, and never, under any circumstances, lock the store from the inside. I thought he was joking at first, but his face was flat serious. When I asked why, he just said, "Too many weird things at night. This store's old, got history. Just stick to the rules and clock in on time, and you'll be fine." I should have taken that as a hint. But back then, I laughed it off. My shifts were 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. It was mostly restocking shelves, checking out the occasional late-night customer, and keeping myself from falling asleep. The store stayed quiet past 1 a.m. most nights. We had regulars, a couple of long-haul truckers who stopped in for snacks, the lady who collected cans and paid for cigarettes with quarters, and a guy named Richard who came in every other night to buy one microwave burrito and a bottle of orange soda. Everyone kept to themselves. It was easy work. The weirdness didn't start right away. My third week in, Warren left early one night, said his wife had a dentist emergency or something. That left me alone for the first time. I didn't mind. I liked the quiet, and the lull of the humming refrigerators had started to feel oddly calming. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard the front chime ding. I glanced up at the monitor by the register that showed the front entrance, but no one was there. I figured maybe the wind pushed the door just enough to trigger the sensor. It happens sometimes. Still, I got up and walked to the front, checked the lot through the glass doors. Empty. No cars, no people. The street was dead quiet. I went back to stocking shelves, headphones in one ear. Then, a few minutes later, the chime went off again. I looked up. Nothing on the monitor. That time, I walked over and pushed the door open, leaned my head out to look both ways. The air was still. Not even a raccoon. I stood there for a moment longer than I should have, trying to convince myself it was just a glitch. I went back behind the counter and rewound the tape from the last 10 minutes on the monitor system. The cameras were cheap and grainy, but I watched the timestamp closely. Just after 2:34:57, the door opened, just barely, and then closed. No one was visible in the frame. No shadows, no movement. Nothing. But the door opened. I told myself it had to be the wind, or maybe a misaligned sensor. That night, just before my shift ended, I went into the back room to grab a fresh pack of receipt paper. The supply closet was just behind the walk-in freezer. As I passed the freezer door, I heard something from inside. It was slow, deliberate knocking, 3 times. I froze. Then I told myself maybe it was the compressor or something mechanical. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting to hear it again. But nothing followed. I walked quickly back to the front and didn't go near the freezer for the rest of the shift. The next morning, Warren came in as usual. I asked him about the freezer noise and the door chime. He didn't even blink. Just said, "Sometimes this place talks. Ignore it." That was it. The next few nights passed without incident, but I started to notice smaller things. Cans on the shelf would be turned backward, labels facing the wall. A mop bucket would be left out when I knew I had stored it. Once, I came back from my break to find every checkout light blinking rapidly, even though I'd turned them off when my shift started. Nothing big, just enough to make me feel like I was losing track of things. Then came the night Richard didn't show up. He was a fixture, always in between 2:15 and 2:30 a.m., always wearing that blue hoodie with the frayed cuffs. But that night, 2:30 came and went. By 3, I felt weirdly anxious about it. Not because I missed the company, but because something about his absence felt wrong, like a missing piece of a puzzle. At 3:17 a.m., the chime rang. I looked at the monitor. No one. I got up and walked to the front. Still empty. But when I turned back to the register, I saw a bottle of orange soda and a microwave burrito sitting on the counter. The scanner hadn't beeped. I hadn't seen or heard anyone walk past me. The security tape, when I checked it later, showed the items just appearing there. One frame they weren't there, the next they were. I called Warren after my shift and told him everything. The door, the freezer, Richard's missing visit, the soda, and burrito. He sighed long and heavy over the phone. This place, sometimes it remembers people, especially if they die close by. I didn't say anything. Richard was hit by a car last night, right across from the store. He died before they could get him to the hospital. It's on the news. I sat down, legs shaking. "I'll come in early tonight," Warren added. "Just stay near the front. Don't go wandering the aisles." That night, Warren showed up at 1 a.m., earlier than usual, and he carried a small box of salt and a red plastic lighter. Without a word, he poured a line of salt across the inside of the front entrance, then walked to the back and did the same in front of the freezer. "What's that supposed to do?" I asked. "Just something the old manager used to do," he said. "Makes them quieter." "Them?" He didn't respond. From then on, the freezer was off limits after midnight, and for the most part, things did calm down for a few weeks. Then we got a new hire. Emily. She was 19, trying to save up for school. Sweet girl. Always wore her hair in a messy bun and hummed to herself while cleaning. Warren put her on night shifts with me, said she was a fast learner, and she was. But after 3 shifts, she started asking questions. "Do you hear someone walking near the freezer when we're alone? Do the cameras ever glitch when the chime rings? Why does the back bathroom door always feel like it's locked from the inside?" I didn't have answers, only warnings. Stick to the front. Stay out of the freezer. Don't respond to your name if you hear it whispered. By the end of her second week, she was on edge. The humming lights made her flinch. She started wearing headphones, but only in one ear. I caught her crying once during a break, just sitting in the stockroom with the lights off. She didn't want to quit, said she needed the money. But she also started keeping a pocket knife clipped to her belt. Then came the night she didn't show up. I tried calling her around midnight. No answer. Warren wasn't in yet. I tried texting, nothing. I figured maybe she'd overslept or bailed. At 2:41 a.m., the front chime rang. The monitor was blank, but when I looked toward the front, I saw it, a single pink scrunchie resting dead center on the floor. Emily wore that exact scrunchie every night. I stepped toward it slowly, picked it up, still warm. I called Warren. No answer. I made the mistake of checking the back. The freezer door was ajar. The salt line was broken, smeared as if someone had stepped through it. I called the police. They found Emily's phone in the dumpster behind the store, screen shattered, but no sign of her. She was listed as a missing person. Her family put up posters. I gave my statement. No one found anything else. Warren never talked about it. He just replaced the salt lines and worked every shift for a week straight. I quit 2 days later, but I still pass by the store sometimes. It's still open, still flickering its neon 24 hours into the dark. I've heard 2 other clerks have vanished since then. One of them, Ben, was found wandering a field 20 miles away, covered in scratches and unable to speak. And the freezer door still creaks open sometimes, even with new locks. People say the place is cursed. Haunted, maybe both, but I think it's something worse, something old. something that feeds on routine, on forgotten people, on the quiet space between midnight and dawn. Some nights I swear I still hear the chime, even when I'm home in bed, miles away, like the store remembers me. And it's waiting. Story the end.